Okay, so let's begin with a little motivation and calming our mind for the class. As always, sit comfortably. I have to tell myself this. Get my legs straight. Drink your coffee down. Relax your mind. Place your attention, first of all, and subsequently your mindfulness on the respiration. It's helpful to remind yourself to concentrate, squeezing attention on the observation of the breathing, because although there may not be other thoughts that are interfering, obviously, your mind can be either attending to some other things subtly, or you're just not, you don't have sufficient attention on the observation of the breathing. So squeezing doesn't mean squeezing your body, of course. Tightening your apprehension of the mindfulness. And then if the mind is a little bit calmed down, follow a breath up to the crown of your head, down to your heart chakra. Leave your attention around there and just watch the contents of your mental consciousness, withdrawing your attention away from your five senses as much as possible. Whatever the contents of the mind, try to see them as clouds in the otherwise clear light nature of your mind, spaciousness of your mind, as a means to let go of them. Concentrate on the spaciousness of the mind within which they are being apprehended, the spaciousness of the mind within which they are appearing. See if you can bring back a remembering consciousness of your experience in the past. This clear light nature of the mind doesn't have a color or shape. It's not dark black, like if your eyes are partially or fully closed. It's apprehended by your gnosis, your wisdom eye. And recognizing its importance, its import, its meaning, that we can generate within our mind all the good qualities that we would like to emulate of our, others that have good qualities, compassion, patience, renunciation, wisdom. We can remove from our minds, because our minds are not stained by faults. We can remove them from our mind. Our mind is fundamentally unstained, is pure from the beginning, only temporarily obscured by adventitious stains. Adventitious meaning just arisen because of causes and conditions, but not necessarily always there. All other living beings are in exactly the same situation we are, in that they want to be happy, but they don't create the causes of happiness generally, because they try to find their happiness through attachment and pushiness and anger and aggression. They want to be free from suffering. Although they wish that, they create the karmic causes for more suffering. All of them are our mothers, have been our mothers numberless times in the past, will be again in the future. They've all been kind to us, even as strangers, even as enemies, giving us the chance to purify our negative karma here and now, giving us the opportunity to have cooperative conditions of roads and milk being delivered to our door or being paid a salary. With a sense of compassion for them, recognizing that they are still under the influence of grasping to a self of persons, grasping to a self of phenomena. Understanding the best way that we can help them is not simply to alleviate their present suffering, but to lead them out of ignorance along the stages of the path to full enlightenment, and to do so perfectly, spontaneously, and including everyone, even the 10th level bodhisattvas, would require us to have achieved enlightenment. With that in mind, thinking that to achieve that state requires deep experience of our own inner laboratory, our mind, where we're going to perform this great experiment of transformation, transmutation into the gold-like body of a Buddha. So we're going to, with the thought of motivation of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, I'm going to participate in the class this morning to sharpen my intellect, understand better the inner workings of the mind, so that I can quickly develop renunciation, bodhicitta, and the right view of emptiness in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then coming back to the present. Good morning, everyone. So Nadine, you sent me some questions. Can you repeat what your question, one of your questions was? You have to unmute. There you go.
It was about facsimiles of a direct perceiver, and how the Prasangikas would maybe see it differently. It was a difficult question. I've written it down in my emails. So memory conceptions are facsimiles of a direct perceiver, but for Prasangikas, memory perceptions are valid cognizers. And that's why I asked this question.
Right. Well, let's say, for instance, if you remember thinking of, say, if you remember your sense of self-grasping, that's not necessarily a, that's a wrong mind. So that's not all memories, remembering consciousnesses are considered to be direct perceivers. Generally, what's the category of direct perceiver? One of the characteristics is it has to be unmistaken, right? So that kind of memory is not unmistaken. So that doesn't fit that category. But for what Nadine is mentioning is that in Prasangika, and we've mentioned this, I think, when we talked in the tenets class also, that generally conceptual minds and perceptual minds are contradictory, right? If something is a conception, it's not a perception. But Prasangika accepts that a remembering consciousness, and remembering consciousness here doesn't mean just the factor of mindfulness that's in the sense consciousnesses. That's one of the omnipresent mental factors. But memory, which is a conceptual state of mind, which brings, recalls something that has happened in the past, that if you remember a realizing mind, something which has realized its objects, which would include prime cognizers and subsequent cognizers, you remember seeing something, you remember inferentially proving something, that those remembering consciousnesses are called manifest, which we can translate as direct perceivers. They have the same strength. They're remembering something which was realized, so they also are realizing consciousnesses. So that's a little sand in the gears when we're talking here. That Nadine's question is talking about in our text. Remembering consciousnesses were called facsimiles of direct perception, but for Prasangika, some of them would actually be called direct perceivers. Does that help? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure. Anyone else have a question before we begin? Something from, yeah, Stephen.
Good morning, Venerable George.
Good morning.
My question is maybe tangential. Will we be having an exam for this first part of the course? Do you know if the center has filled you in on that?
I do know that the center has not filled me in on that. I know that I think there was supposed to be, after our next class, hopefully we'll finish next class with this portion of the text, not including the mental factors, just about the 7 ways of knowing. There's supposed to be 1 week break, is that right? Am I right, or is it? Okay, there's no 1 week break. So I think originally they were thinking we would finish 2 weeks earlier and that there would be a period for the exam and study. So I don't know what the current thinking is, whether they want to take a break after this. So we'll morning, David, good to see you. So let's wait on that, talk to Shanka and Bob, neither of whom are able to attend this morning. They're off doing some other Dharma things. Okay. Any Dharma question? Gabriel? Yarbel? Anything? No? You're good? Oh, Nadine has another question. Okay.
Yes, is an I consciousness necessarily a direct perceiver?
Is an I consciousness necessarily a direct perceiver? Okay, good question. So I'm going to ask Amanda. What do you think?
I don't know. I'm sorry.
What are you sorry? You're sorry you can't answer, or are you sorry?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay. I thought you were going to say, sorry, Nadine, it's not. Let's see. I can't see Manuel, but I think he's here. Manuel, is an I consciousness necessarily a direct perceiver?
Hello. Yes, I think so. Yes.
Ah, okay. So what about my I consciousness that sees a double moon? Could be someone sticking their finger in my eye, or I consciousness that sees a a sparkler, or a like a what is it called, a torch. You swirl around, it looks like a circle of fire. Is that a direct perceiver? That's an
Yes, I think so. Maybe it's not a valid one, but yes, I think so.
So it's not valid, of course, but it's mistaken with respect to its appearing object, which is one of the characteristics of a direct perceiver. Direct perceiver is something where something appears clearly and the consciousness is not mistaken with respect to that appearance. But in the case of, like the examples that we gave also, say rowing in a boat, or say being on a train and it appears that everything is moving past you, those are examples of mistaken. You're mistaken with respect to the appearing object. So those are not called direct perceiver. Was that what you had in mind, Nadine?
Yes, thank you. I did not understand this. Now I see. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So those are non-conceptual. You could say direct perceivers are non-conceptual consciousnesses to which an object clearly appears unmistakably. Okay, you're not mistaken with the clear appearance of what's appearing. Okay, so let's okay. One last query by Christine before we start.
And I think you answered it, but do the Prasangikas view this idea of ascertainment that Dreyfus talks about, and that the subtlety,
Right.
do they have a different concept about that, or a different idea about that? Yes or no?
Well, I had suggested that, I guess it was, I'm not sure if it was sent to you, that article that by Dreyfus.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, so I'm just sending it to the class. So here, generally speaking, ascertaining consciousness is a mental consciousness. It's a conceptual consciousness, generally, when we talk about that. But there is some difference of opinion. Let me just look at everyone again. So sometimes you can say there is ascertainment in the eye consciousness, in the sense consciousnesses, but it doesn't have the same meaning as ascertaining consciousness. An ascertaining consciousness is one that's able to induce a memory. So when you see something and the mental consciousness has ascertained that, it can induce a remembering consciousness of that, of having seen that. If you didn't have mental consciousness, all of our senses are merely receptive. I had a nice little phrase here that I didn't have it underlined there. Our senses are merely receptive, like the example I gave of the monitors that, the cameras that you have around your house. They don't do any thinking or judgment. Even the evaluation of whether that's your mother's face or not is actually done by the mental consciousness, the eye consciousness, although the text seems to imply that the eye consciousness recognizes a familiar object. It's actually the interface between the mental consciousness and the sense consciousness that's actually ascertaining that fact. Let's leave that for the time being. Let's go a little bit further in our text. Manuel, if you're trying to save bandwidth, I was just asking you to come on so that we could see you, so that I knew that you were there. But if you're saving bandwidth, feel free to go back again. But if you could join us, that's good too. So where do you recall we were last time? Definitions. We finished the definition of valid cognizers that induces ascertainment by themselves. Valid cognizers. So we talked about the divisions of that, the illustrations, and then valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another. We talked about those definitions and divisions, right?
We're at where valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another are divided terminologically. There are three.
So what page is that?
Oh, I just copied it. Let's see. I don't know. I have to find it. Give me a second. Page.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You got
27.
Page 28. I think
27, right?
27.
When valid cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, are divided. Is that what you're saying?
Are divided terminologically. There are three. Yes.
Initial direct perceivers, inattentive direct perceivers, and direct perceivers having a cause of error. We all on the same page? No, you're not. Okay, page in the text by the translation by Liz Napper, page 27, right? Just after first paragraph, it says 2. When valid cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, are divided terminologically, there are 3. So remember what terminological divisions are. They're not necessarily actually that thing, but the term is sometimes applied. When we talked about facsimiles of direct perceptions. So here, initial direct perceivers. What's an illustration of that? A sense direct perceiver in the continuum of a person who has not previously experienced seeing an utpala, that utpala flower, that's kind of blue lotus, right? That apprehends the color of an utpala. So I do remember talking about this last time. Remember, upala, I said, was the color, it was the kind of flower that Tara is holding. Remember, it's kind of a blue lotus. And I told the story of, I asked Lama Yeshe, why is she holding a blue lotus? And Lama said, I don't know, you have to ask her. Maybe she just likes blue, right? So anyway, upala is a kind of flower. So if you or any kind of flower, say, or you see some color and your eye consciousness perceives that, but you have never seen that before, you don't know the name of that, that is an initial, that's an example of an initial direct perceiver. To know that you're actually looking at an upala flower, you have to be told by someone else that's an upala. Right? Say, for instance, if you see a tree and you don't know if it's cypress or an oak or something else, you see the color. You know that it's a tree, but the it is an initial direct perceiver where the ascertainment is induced by another, that it is, what type of tree it is. So then inattentive direct perceivers, do you think that's inattentive direct perceivers could be valid cognizers? No, so this would be a terminological division, right? The second, an inattentive direct perceiver is, for example, a sense direct perceiver that apprehends sound in the continuum of a person whose mind is especially attracted to a beautiful form, visual form. So that means you're looking at something, your mind, your mental consciousness is mainly paying attention to what your eye consciousness is seeing. And although sound appears to your ear consciousness, it's not apprehended. That is, the mental consciousness doesn't pay sufficient attention to that to remember that you heard the sound. Make sense? Venerable? Yeah, okay. The third, direct perceivers having a cause of error. So are those valid cognizers? Let's see. Example, a sense direct perceiver apprehending the color of a mirage that directly generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. So this is under the division when valid cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, are divided. So where is the ascertainment induced by another in that example? Rowena, you following?
It's induced by the water.
No, not induced by the water, induced by another person, let's say.
Oh, okay, you're talking about another person, all right.
The third, a direct perceiver having a cause of error. So this is the example. This is supposed to be an example of the terminological division of valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another. It could be another person, or it could be another of your consciousnesses, but it's not induced by something else. So what is that? What is being induced? Where is the ascertainment that is induced by another there in that example?
You know, my text isn't laid out the same.
Oh, don't you have a different translation of the text?
No, I just have an older version, which I've scribbled all over.
Oh, okay.
So what of
So we've got a sense direct perceiver.
Okay.
We're seeing the color of a mirage. That is to say, does a mirage appear to eye consciousness? Let me ask that.
Well, water appears to your eye consciousness, but
No,
not.
no, I'm not talking about water. I'm talking about mirage. You might say, well, mirage is water. Mirage is not water, right? Mirage is the appearance of water.
Appearance of water. So the appearance.
Does a mirage appear to eye consciousness?
If you're driving down the road,
Amanda's
yeah,
kind of nodding, I think. Yeah.
In front of you.
Stephen's nodding. Karen's nodding. Yeah.
Driving across Arizona, weird things happen like that.
Okay. A sense direct perceiver apprehending the color of a mirage. So that's not wrong. That consciousness is seeing some color.
Yeah.
Maybe is shimmering, maybe it can look blue, maybe it doesn't look blue, it looks transparent or something. So far, that's an eye direct perceiver, right?
That's correct.
That directly generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. Does the eye consciousness do that?
No.
No, it's not. Eye consciousness doesn't think water.
It doesn't think water. No, it's a mental conscious labeling it.
Yeah, that thinks water. So that's said to be a direct perceiver having a cause of error.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So direct perceiver having a cause of error, a sense direct perceiver apprehending the color of water. Let's say, just say a color of a mirage. So you could just say a sense direct perceiver perceiving a mirage that directly generates a superimposition apprehending the mirage as water. So that gives rise to the mental consciousness that thinks water. So is that the mental consciousness that thinks that that's water, is that a valid cognizer?
No.
So where is the induced by another? Where is that implicit in this example?
Well, induced by another is some previous concept you have about what you might be seeing, isn't it?
So it's not another person in this case, not like
no, it's a visual memory of seeing something, and then superimposing it on what you're actually looking at. I don't know. I've experienced this, but I don't know where the fits in your direction here.
Right. So
because I will actually slow down thinking I am going to slip. Like I'm driving, like you drive 80 miles an hour in Arizona, you see something, you're going to slow down because you think you're going to slip because
right. Exactly. You think you're going through water, or you think there might be ice or something like that. So I'm uncertain myself here whether this is due to the fact that you have another memory that correlates that color with the color of water. So I will check on that, but this is the illustration that's being given that. So then, when valid cognizers, when ascertainment is induced by another, are terminologically divided in another way, as if that wasn't enough. We talk about valid cognizers when ascertainment of the appearance is induced by itself, but the truth by another. Valid cognizers when ascertainment of the generality is induced by itself, but the particular by another. And valid cognizers when even the mere appearance is induced by another. Okay, again, these are terminological divisions, so they're not necessarily valid cognizers. The first example of the first, a sense, so the first being a valid cognizer when ascertainment of the appearance is induced by itself, but the truth by another. Say, for instance, you see a reddish color. I thought we had gone over this before.
We did do this. Yeah, we did do this. It just takes, I have to slide
Okay,
around.
no, but I thought someone had said this is where we were, this is where we'd ended. So if you see the color red in the distance and you're not sure whether it's fire or not, so this is supposed to be the example of the appearance is there, but what that is the appearance of is not clear, whether it's the appearance of fire or a red cloth or a red light in the distance. That ascertainment has to be induced by another. So that can be another person, or it can be another one of your consciousnesses when you get closer, something like that. Valid cognizers when an ascertainment of the generality is induced by itself, but the particular by another. Example is a sense direct perceiver apprehending a tree having leaves and branches, which is in fact an Ashoka tree, or a pine or a cypress or whatever, with respect to which there is the doubt, wondering, is that an Ashoka tree or not? And the third example, a sense direct perceiver apprehending blue that induces a doubting consciousness that thinks, did I see blue or not? Is that a direct valid cognizer? Karen, what do you think? A sense direct perceiver apprehending blue, I mean eye consciousness, right? That induces a doubting consciousness that thinks, did I see blue or not?
Well, it's a direct perceiver, but it's not valid. So
why isn't it valid?
Well, because you don't know if the color that you're seeing, if it's blue or not. So there's an error or a mistaken. No.
Could it be that, or is it an inattentive perception?
Oh, could be. Sorry.
So,
could be.
Someone's calling you. So, yeah. So an inattentive perception, or in other words, the technical term is a perception to which an object appears but is not ascertained. That means that the mental consciousness did not pay enough attention to it to induce a remembering consciousness that I saw blue or whatever like that. So that would not act. That's why it's a terminological division here. That is that one, for instance, is not an actual valid cognizer, because the division is valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another, but induced by another. Okay. Are we on the same page now? Okay. So there is a difference, continuing, there is a difference between those valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another as to whether they are actual or imputed. For instance, or for the first and the second are actual valid cognizers when ascertainment is induced by another, whereas the latter one is an imputed one, a valid cognizer when ascertainment of even the mere appearance is induced by another. Right? We just went over that. Also, from amongst those, the first, a valid cognizer when ascertainment of the appearance is induced by itself, but the truth by another, is both that which induces, this is getting to fine nitty-gritty here, is both that which induces ascertainment by itself and also a valid cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself with respect to a reddish color in the distance, which is in fact the color of fire, but with respect to which there is a doubt wondering, is that the color of fire or not? That's not the same as wondering whether you saw red. You saw red, but you're not sure whether it's the color of fire or not. Does that make sense? It's getting into some kind of nitty gritty here. It is also that which as it's a friend calling who always says, "Oh, you hang up on me," so they're going to be disappointed that I just hung up on them. It is also that when ascertainment is induced by another, and a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another with respect to such a reddish color being the color of fire. However, it is not a valid cognizer with respect to that reddish color being the color of fire. That's clear, right? You see the color, it is not a valid cognizer with respect to that being the color of fire. In brief, whatever is a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another, think, valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another is necessarily a valid cognizer. It's a valid cognizer of what it's seeing, but the actual, either the fact or the particular or something is induced by another. However, whatever is a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another with respect to a particular phenomena is necessarily not a valid cognizer with respect to that phenomena. It's going over the same thing again and again from different perspectives. David, are you following? Or are you just kind of, so for instance, whatever is a valid cognizer with respect to a particular phenomena is necessarily, I would say, whatever is a valid cognizer when ascertainment is induced by another with respect to a particular phenomena, like say that is the color of fire, is not a valid cognizer with respect to that phenomenon that it is the color of fire. It's not a valid cognizer with respect to that. Whatever is a valid cognizer with respect to a particular phenomenon is necessarily a valid cognizer that induces ascertainment by itself with respect to that phenomenon. That all fits together, right?
I like that one.
Pardon? Rowanda, did you say something?
Yes, that one makes more sense.
Okay.
Sorry, I just at my.
Okay. So let's go on to the next division. Valid cognizers that are persons, speech, and consciousness. So I like to say, you don't have to say valid cognizers. You can just say pramana that are persons, speech, and consciousnesses. Some of my Dharma friends say that it's correct to say valid cognizers that are persons, speech, and consciousness. Speech is not a consciousness though, right? Valid cognizers let's say speech is not a valid cognizer, is it? Anyway, there's some doubt about the terminology here, but in general, we say there are three kinds of pramana or validity, or you could say, here it says prime cognizers or valid cognizers. You don't have to necessarily use the word cognizer here. We can say pramana that are persons, such as the Buddha. The Buddha is a reliable person. People who say that the word, you can say pramana means valid cognizer because the Buddha is a valid cognizer. Pramana that are speech, such as the turning of the wheel of Dharma, of the Four Noble Truths. That's said to be pramana or reliable because it's non-deceptive. But if you want to call it a valid cognizer, it's kind of hard to see how you call speech a valid cognizer. What do you think? You can say it's pramana, it's valid. Any ideas? Any thoughts? What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, thank you. Sort of, yeah, there's like the hamster is like running around in the wheel up there. Yeah, so what I'm thinking is, so I mean, like, well, it depends what you mean by speech. If it's like the process of, like I'm talking right now, that could potentially be like a valid cognition is happening in my head. I don't know, when I'm thinking and expressing myself.
So speech,
but I think we also said that speech could be extended to also writing. And so it's like some kind of artifact outside of our human or other body. And so it's not really a cognizer. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think there's some say space for debate here. I like to say, just use the word pramana. When we use the word pramana, generally in our text, we're translating it as valid cognizer or prime cognizer. They've changed, I think Elizabeth put in all of her places here, prime cognizer, but there was a note earlier in the text that said they're changing it all to valid cognizer. So then leave that aside. The word cognizer is there, but my point is that pramana doesn't necessarily have to mean a cognizer. So one of my friends, Dharma friends, who I was debating with the other night about this, was trying to say that it was okay to say cognizer, and then I said, there's a famous verse in the praise to Vajrayogini, which some of you may practice. I don't know. Anyone practice Vajrayogini? Anyway, there's a praise also in the Haruka Tantras. So we're talking about Tantra here. The goddesses are pramana. Their vows or samayas, their commitments are pramana, and the explanations that they give are also pramana. And by these truths, by the force of this truth, may I be always protected by the goddesses, meaning the dakinis and so forth, dakas and dakinis. So their vows, it's kind of hard to say how their vows, if you were to translate pramana as valid cognizer, how their vows are valid cognizers, or their explanations are valid cognizers. You could say they're all valid, they're all true and reliable, that sense of pramana. So my friend was not quite sure. I was arguing that pramana here means generally reliable, perfect, valid, and so forth. So anyway, there are valid, where we say there are pramanas that are persons, pramanas that are speech, and pramanas that are consciousnesses. So we've been talking about mainly valid cognizers that are consciousnesses, but there are also pramanas that are persons. So a pramana that is a person, for example, is the teacher Buddha, the founder Buddha, totally reliable. And that's what's essentially established in the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, the famous text by Dharmakirti. Valid cognizers that are, or pramana that is speech is, for example, the wheel of doctrine of the Four Noble Truths. And pramanas that are consciousnesses are, for example, direct perceiver or an inferential cognizer. Are direct perceivers necessarily pramana? Nadine, what do you think? You're saying no.
No. Only some direct perceivers are pramana, because
Only which direct?
Only some.
What is a direct perceiver that is not pramana?
One that is not incontrovertible. A direct
Can you give an
perceiver.
example? Can you give an example of a direct perceiver that is not incontrovertible?
If I see a blue snow mountain, maybe.
Well, that's not a direct perceiver, though.
Okay.
Right? That's non-conceptual, a non-conceptual consciousness to which a
subsequent moment, maybe.
Subsequent, yeah. So it's not so much that it's incontrovertible that here the meaning of being fresh is important. So there are direct perceivers. This is just giving an example of valid cognizers that are consciousnesses. So you'd have to say valid cognizers that are direct perceivers or valid cognizers that are inferential cognitions. Okay. All together? That's not too bad. So now, definite enumeration of valid cognizers. So why are there, we've said there are two kinds of valid cognizers: direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. And you might say, well, yeah, that's all there are. Other schools, Indian schools of logic, had varying numbers of what they considered to be reliable or pramana. Okay, again, we could use the general word reliable or valid. They had varying lists, even up to 10 or 12 different kinds of things. So Dignaga and Dharmakirti said that there were just two kinds of valid cognizers. Everything else could be included in these. So that more than these are unnecessary. You don't need more than two divisions, and fewer would not be inclusive. If you only said there was one valid cognizer, that would not include everything. Is the meaning of the enumeration of valid cognizers being limited to two, for valid cognizers are limited to those two. So what is this talking about? Well, there are two kinds of generally two kinds of objects: those that are manifest or obvious. Those are things that are perceived by direct valid cognizers. Phenomena that are hidden, and in that implicitly is deeply hidden, are phenomena that have to be understood by inferential valid cognizers through logic. Not just through logic, but generating a consciousness that apprehends them validly. So as objects are of two kinds, manifest and hidden, therefore all valid cognizers, all pramana, have to be of those of two types. One kind of valid cognition that knows manifest phenomena, obvious phenomena. Does anyone remember the Sanskrit word for that? Obvious or manifest? It's generally the Sanskrit word is prataksha, which we talked a little bit in our tenets class. Generally, prataksha means, Tibetan translates it as ngunsum, that means direct, like direct perceiver. But for Prasangika, the meaning of prataksha or direct mainly refers to the object rather than the subject. Here, all the time in Sautrantika, it's always talking about the subject is ngunsum, is direct. And so we translate it as direct perceiver. But mainly it refers to the object, according to Prasangika. Things are either obvious, that is directly perceivable, directly appearing to us, or things are not directly appearing, in which case they are hidden and they need to use an inference to apprehend them. It's more or less what we talked about before, but just stating in a particular way. Anyone have a doubt about that? Think about that? Here it doesn't, it's not going, our text isn't going into the detail of why there are these two kinds. But generally we would say that because the objects of knowledge are of two kinds, manifest and hidden, that there need to be two kinds of valid cognizers. Direct valid cognizers are cognizers of the obvious or manifest phenomena. Inferential valid cognizers are valid cognizers of that which is hidden to us, either slightly hidden or deeply hidden. How can we perceive deeply hidden phenomena through inference?
Through faith.
Is that a valid, faith is a valid cognizer? Who said that?
I said that.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
We have to have faith in the validity of the Buddha's word. I mean, it's
right, but that particular kind of inference, it's not called inference through faith, right? It's a kind of inference that has ascertained that the person telling us is a valid person.
Oh, okay.
And the way that one ascertains that is not just merely by faith. That would still be kind of like correct belief, so-and-so, Geshe so-and-so, or George said, or, Bob said, or something like that. You have faith that they know what they're talking about. You have to ascertain that they're a valid person. And that's the whole enterprise of one of the chapters of the Pramanavartaka, proving that the Buddha is a valid person. And we mentioned a little bit before how you can ascertain that the Buddha is a valid person. In a simple way, we could say, once you've understood, you had a realization of emptiness, which is a hidden phenomena and not obvious to us, selflessness, okay? Most people in the world, even religious systems, all say that there is a soul, they won't necessarily use the word inherently existent or truly existent, but there's some kind of findable soul of a person. Once you've realized the lack of that kind of soul or self through direct perception, or even through inference, you've realized selflessness to some degree, you can develop an incredible appreciation for the truthfulness of the Buddha, who didn't lie about this hidden phenomena. Why would he have lied about karma or reincarnation or other things? Also seeing his activities, achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, various ways that you can ascertain that the Buddha is a reliable person, is pramana. When we talked about these three kinds of pramana, just in the previous section, pramana, which are persons, why the Buddha is pramana. Once you've established that, then you can rely upon their pronouncements, their, what's it called when you predict something, their predictions or something, you will attain this, you will become a Buddha in the future with this name and that place and so forth. You can have an inferential cognizer that realizes the truth of that based on your having ascertained that they're a perfect person, that they are a pramana person. Okay. So then, with respect to the differences in substantial entity, direct perceiver and inferential cognizer are one substantial entity. Okay, this is going to throw you for a loop. Because direct perceiver is one substantial entity with inferential cognizer. Is that right? Is a direct perceiver an inferential cognizer? The same substance as an inferential cognizer? Here it's dealing a little bit with the terminology. It doesn't mean that every direct perceiver is one substantial entity. What does one substantial entity means? It means the same substance of consciousness. It doesn't mean that every direct perceiver is the same substance as an inferential cognizer. Say, for instance, there are some examples, though. If you have an inferential cognizer, you've realized that sound is impermanent by the sign of it being a product, right? This example. So you've realized subtle impermanence. That's an inferential cognizer. Is that a perception or a conception? Stephen mouthed the word conception, I think. I'm not sure.
Conception.
Conception. David, is that a perception or conception?
Conception.
You have a nice, somehow the background is blurred. You have some kind of special, is it on your iPhone or something?
It's a zoom option.
Zoom option. You can blur the background. Okay, that's good. I didn't know that. So that inferential cognizer is a conception. But there is according to the Sautrantika, there is a self-knower, self-knowing direct perception that's knowing the consciousness itself, right? That self-knower is a direct perceiver. Okay. Stephen is at least thinking. Some of the others are just accepting. So the conceptual mind has within its substance a self-knower that's knowing the consciousness. So that is an example of a direct perceiver, which is one substantial entity with a conception. Make sense? Okay, Karen's kind of, okay, it's like playing with words here. That's useful to know. It doesn't mean that every direct perceiver is one substantial entity with a conception, right? Doesn't mean that. It's just meaning there are examples of this. With respect to the differences in substantial entity, generally, the substantial entity of an I consciousness, which is another knower, right? I consciousness is not one substantial entity with conception. It has no conception in it, right? With respect to the differences in substantial entity, direct perceiver and inferential cognizer are one substantial entity, because there is some example. Here we're just giving the general term, direct perceiver and inferential cognizer. There is some overlap. So then we can say they are one substantial entity. Let's say direct perceiver and inferential cognizer are one substantial entity because direct perceiver is one substantial entity with inferential cognizer. It doesn't mean that every direct perceiver is one substantial entity with inferential cognizer. In dependence on this reasoning, all of the following are established as one substantial entity. So there are always two things that are one entity, one substantial entity: conceptual consciousness and non-conceptual consciousness. What's an example of that? Oh, just what we gave. Say you have a conception, conceptual consciousness, the self-knower that is one substance with that is non-conceptual. So it's possible to have a non-conceptual consciousness that's one entity with a conceptual consciousness. Mistaken consciousness and non-mistaken consciousness. Mistaken consciousness, let's say a mistaken consciousness, let's take an I consciousness that sees this snow mountain as yellow or blue. The self-knower of that is non-mistaken because it's not seeing blue, it's only seeing consciousness, right? Seems like nitty-gritty, right? It's like, okay. The two, sense consciousness and mental consciousness. What's the example of that? One substantial entity. Stephen?
So I consciousness, and then the self-knower knowing that the I consciousness is seeing. That's the more.
So is the self-conscious self-knower
is a mental consciousness.
It's a mental consciousness, right? Even though it is in the I consciousness, it is categorized as a as a mental consciousness. So all of these are just that example. The two, mind and mental factors. Now we get into the difference. Have we talked about mind and mental factors before? A little bit, right? So generally, that's going to be one of the subjects when we started talking about the second part of the course, mind and mental factors. So generally, mind or chitta means primary mind. And so Tibetan, we say sem. In Sanskrit, we say chitta, like bodhicitta, right? That means primary mind. Primary mind is that aspect of a consciousness that knows the mere entity of the perceptual field. They're not going into details, it's just the mere entity. Mental factors, or in Tibetan, semjung. Semjung means that which is risen within the chitta, within the sem, are those aspects of the consciousness that know the particularities of the perceptual field. Say, for instance, feeling or discrimination or contact or something like that. They are one entity, one substantial entity. There's one substantial entity of consciousness. One aspect of that consciousness is its ability to know the mere entity of the perceptual field, the mere presence of the perceptual field. And another quality of that consciousness is its ability to know particularities, like to discriminate one thing from another, to move the mind move the consciousness toward one thing or another. Those are called mental factors. So here now we're not giving the example of a self-knower. In the first three, all examples were self-knowers. Now, mind and mental factors are one substantial entity. Valid cognizer and non-valid cognizer. What's an example of a valid cognizer that is one substantial entity with a non-valid cognizer? Well, you could probably say, you could give the example of a self-knower again in one variation, but let's say, what about a valid cognizer that apprehends the color red? Is that necessarily a valid cognizer that recognizes that's the color of fire? No. So they would be one substantial entity, right? Karen is kind of like, I'm not sure. Okay. Rowena, are you following? Okay, Doris, sorry, Doris, you had a question before. Yeah.
Well, I don't know how to word, not really my wording, obviously a problem. So one substantial entity, can I substitute the word that each of these pairings would constitute a set?
Here we're talking about substance. So say, for instance, the substantial entity of my little gadget to turn on my fan on the ceiling is also the light. That's not one substance with my iPhone. They're different substances, right? They're different substantial entities. the table and its color, are they the same color and table? They're not the same. Are they one substantial entity?
See, I don't understand what substantial entity.
So can you
So I would say
separate,
no.
can you separate the substantial entity of the color from the substance of the table? Or let's say the classic example, lapis lazuli. If you separated the color of the lapis lazuli, you know what lapis lazuli is?
I
Some
do.
kind of gem, right? Some stone. Or turquoise, let's say turquoise. Can you separate the color of the turquoise from the turquoise? Well, if you took the color out, it wouldn't be turquoise any longer, right?
Right, that one's a weird one.
Or ruby, you know, ruby red. You could take out certain of the atoms within that, molecules that are chromium or whatever that makes the color, the reddish color of the ruby. Rubies are red, right? Right. Take those out, but then it wouldn't be ruby any longer because it's being red is one substantial entity with being the ruby. Make sense? Okay, you have to think about it for some time.
I just want it for I need my own words for it, I guess. I
Okay.
understand what you're saying. I just need my
Okay.
own words.
So we're dealing here with the word substance. So some things that are different substances are things that can exist independently, have their own identity independently, right? So if they're one substantial entity, that means, let's say when we use the word entity, when we talk about, well, let's see, the two truths, when we talk about, especially in the Prasangika, we talk about every phenomena has two truths. This mug has its conventional truth and its ultimate truth, right? The conventional truth is the appearance of it to sense consciousness as though existing from its own side. That's its conventional truth. It still functions within that realm. It's true, it's valid with respect to conventionality. You know, that this has it serves a purpose, it has a continuity and so forth. Yet that relative truth, its conventional truth, is one substantial entity with its ultimate truth. The fact that it is empty of inherent existence. If it were not one substantial entity with its ultimate truth, you could separate. You could take the ultimate truth of the mug, put it over here, and the conventional entity of the mug over here, and you could recognize them separately. They're like the two faces of a coin, right? Although you can argue, you can slice the coin down with a very fine saw down the middle, so there's a head and a tail or a face and a back. It's no longer a coin any longer, right? If you separate them like that, they're one substantial entity. So the two truths are one substantial entity. Impermanence is one substantial entity with these objects. It's not something that you could separate out.
For me, the word separate, you can't separate it out.
You can separate it conceptually.
Gotcha.
You can separate the emptiness of the mug from its conventional existence. You can separate its ultimate truth from its conventional truth conceptually, but they form one entity, one thing.
They're married.
They're married. There you go. Well, yeah. I mean, you can get divorced if you get married, right? Yarpul, yeah. Venerable.
Thank you.
Venerable Gurme translates for Yeshe Choni, substantial entity as collection.
Who does?
Venerable Gurme translates
Gurme,
for
yeah.
Yeshe
Singapore, yeah.
Choni. He translated it as the substantial entity as collection.
Maybe in some excuse me, maybe in some context, but maybe if you think of it in a certain way. Generally, the word collection has a particular word in Tibetan, sok, which doesn't mean one substantial entity, but maybe in some circumstances, if you talk about a collection of things, you can't separate something. Well, like you say, the chromium atom from the ruby, you can't take it out and it still be, you could have the chromium here and the ruby here, because if you took out the chromium, it would no longer have the appearance of red. That's one of the atoms that causes the refraction and so forth to look that
So
color.
that would be like part of the collection as a ruby.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure why Gurme has translated it that way, to tell you the truth.
I certainly don't know either.
Okay, so let's go a little bit further. So we just finished that on page 29. So on page 30, right in the middle, there's a sentence or a little paragraph that says, therefore the definition, oh wait, we missed something here. Okay, we talked about direct valid cognizers and inferential valid cognizers. And then actually we're saying therefore, that's in response to these mistaken ideas about the definition of what conceptual consciousness means, or free from conceptuality, what a direct perceiver is. One of the ways that we can refer to direct perception is that which is free from conceptuality. So the definition of free from conceptuality is free from being a determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed. Oh boy. Okay, let's go about it. I'll address you in a second, Stephen. I see your hand there. So generally, let's start from this. This is coming out of left field, seemingly, right? So generally, we can say a conceptual consciousness, conception, is that which is a determinative knower which apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed. So what does that mean? What is the definition of conceptual mind? First of all, it's a determinative knower. That means it has a determined object. It is not a I don't want to say it's not a perceptual mind. It has a determined object, which is a characteristic of just conception, that it's an object that has come to a conclusion about, that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed. Here's the little bit new terms. So sound generality and meaning generality. Another way of saying this is nominal image and experiential image. Let me read you the section from Geshe Rapton's book, which is mainly the translation is all Steve Batchelor and Alan Wallace. Steve Batchelor is the nominal editor. A conception, or we can say conceptual mind, conceptual consciousness. Conception is defined as a conceiving cognition that's equivalent to his determinative knower, conceiving cognition, that apprehends its object through the media of experiential and nominal images that are fit to be mixed. It's exactly the same definition using different English terms, okay? A conception, that is a conceptual mind, is defined as a conceiving cognition or determinative knower. That means it's not knowing its object directly, that apprehends its object through the media of experiential and nominal images that are fit to be mixed. Okay, what does this mean? It's the exact same definition using different words for almost every term. Generally speaking, we define a mental image. Remember when we talk about conception, we say we know something via a mental image, okay? A mental image of an object is a mentally projected entity that whilst, so Stephen being British is saying, whilst not being the object, appears as though it were. So you have a mental image of your mother's face, which is not your mother's face, but it appears to be your mother's face. It's that through which you know your mother's face conceptually, right? Your mother's face is the determined object, the object that you're actually knowing, and the mental image is the appearing object of that. The appearing object and the engaged object or the determined object are different. Whereas in perception, your appearing object and your engaged object are the same. Whereas in conception, the appearing object is the mental image, the conceived object, determined object, the engaged object is something different. It's the actual mother's, say your mother's face. Generally speaking, we define a mental image of an object as the mentally projected entity that, whilst not being the object, appears as though it were. That's why conception is said to be mistaken. It's mistaken with respect to its appearing object. Its appearing object is the mental image, but the object that you're apprehending is your mother's face, let's say, the actual mother's face. Here, although we have to make a distinction between experiential mental images or meaning generality, say experiential meaning, what's the connection? That means the actual object that you're talking about, if it's something that you've experienced before, you know the meaning, then it's called an experiential experiential image or a meaning generality. We have to differentiate between experiential images on the one hand and nominal images on the other. Both of them nevertheless bear these defining characteristics. That is, it's that by which you are knowing something conceptually, either through a meaning generality, which is called here experiential image, or a nominal or sound generality. So what does that mean? Say, for instance, pot, or let's say pot. If you don't know the term pot, you can still have a meaning generality of pot, a mental image of pot, right? You've seen that, and you can conceive of that thing. Maybe you know that it's something that you can put water in, or you can put oil in, or you can, different kinds of pots you can cook in or whatever. You can have a mental image of that. You can have a meaning generality. The sound generality, or the nominal, what is it called here? Nominal mental image, is when you give the name pot. You say, when you're a child, you say, what's that? My father always used to say when I was a kid, say, what that? What's that? Kids always ask that, what's that, right? So you give a nominal, you give a name to that. And then within that person's mind, there is a relationship between the object, the meaning generality, the experiential mental image, and the nominal mental image, the name that you've given to that. Following? Karen? I can't tell if David is maybe in the same place you are, but his background, his background is blurred. I could tell that there's a similar kind of brick, but blurred brick. So
it's a picture of what's going through my head.
yeah,
Blurry.
Very blurry. Okay, that makes sense. Thus, experiential images, that means meaning generalities, and nominal images, in other words, sound generalities, are both types of mental images. We could call them both mental images. One is a meaning generality when you've experienced something and you know that through your own experience, and one is just a nominal. Say, for instance, you can have a mental image of an example in this book. You can have a mental image of Rome. Has anyone here been to Rome? I'm sure. Okay, a couple of you have. I was going to say, Karen, you've never been to Rome? Oh my God. The one definite Italian here has not been to Rome. Okay, so you can have a mental image of Rome, which is not based on your experience, just on other nominal descriptions. Rome is like this, it has Colosseum and roads and so forth. That is called a, what do we call here? Nominal mental image or a sound generality. When you have that mental image of Rome, it still might appear as something, you might have something, but when you actually go to Rome and you see it, it might look quite different. Or if you have explained to you what a particular person looks like, Yeshe so-and-so, you have a mental image which is just a sound generality or a nominal mental image of that based on description. When you actually meet them, it may not, they may look a little bit different, like often say, oh, I thought you would be taller. I thought you'd be fatter or something like that, right? Have you ever heard that kind of thing? Someone has explained to you. So there's two kinds of mental images. Those that you have developed through some experience, you've gotten to the meaning of it, meaning generality or experiential mental image, and those mental images that are based just on verbiage, sound generalities, or terminological, what's the word he uses here? Nominal image. Those two are suitable to be joined, to be mixed. Once you've had an experiential mental image, you've seen the meaning of something or you experienced the meaning of something, you can mix with that its nominal mental image. So that's why it said suitable to be mixed. So let me get to Stephen first, and then to Yarpel, and then to Nadine, and to Christine. Stephen.
Yeah. So okay, if I may, two questions, and I can always go after everyone else for my second. The first one is, so free from conceptuality. I just want to confirm my grasp of it here. So if a mind is free from conceptuality, say a sense consciousness,
right? That
doesn't mean it is a direct perceiver, though, because we gave examples at the beginning of the class where you could have a mistaken eye consciousness. Am I right there?
Exactly right. Yes. So
okay.
Free conceptuality is a more general term than direct perceiver. Direct perceivers fit within, say, the bigger circle of free from conceptuality. A lot of them are direct perceivers, but there are some that are free from conceptuality that are mistaken in some way, that still are non-conceptual. They're free from conceptuality, but they're not direct receivers. So that's right.
Thank you. I'm not sure I got that until today.
Okay, yeah. So that we're probably our whole image of all of this is increasing, is becoming a little clearer, other than David's case, where the background is still unclear. Yarpel, you had another question.
Yes, is like if you had a picture or a video of Rome, would that be still a nominal?
So that's interesting. So I think if you were to see a photograph of Bill Clinton, and then you'd actually see Bill Clinton in reality, that's the only, you'd had Bill Clinton described to you as former president, is this or that, and you had a photo, that would be somewhat like an experiential mental image. And especially if you see a video on TV of them walking around and doing different things, that would be very much an experiential mental image, but one that's based just on terminology, describing something to you like, like Botswana in Africa or something like that. You've never seen a photo of that. And that would just be a nominal mental image that you have explained to you. It's in Africa, it must be hot or this or that or so forth. So nominal mental images are important because we give names to things. And the conception is something that deals both with nominal mental images and experiential mental images. And it can connect the name, the nominal mental image or the description with the actual object itself. So that's why when we talk about here, the definition of free from conceptuality, this is our starting point. Free from being a determinative knower, that is a conceptual mind that apprehends a sound generality or terminological nominal mental image, and a meaning generality or an experiential mental image as suitable to be mixed, because the two are suitable to be joined or mixed, the name and the object. I forgot now. Oh yeah, so Christine has a question.
What about if you read a description of Rome? Is that nominal?
That would be, I believe that's a perfect description of nominal mental image. You have a mental image. If you've seen Rome and then you read a description, the two are going to be mixed.
Right, but you didn't hear it. You just read the words. That's hearing it or reading the words.
Reading,
okay.
Yeah, nominal, name, meaning. Some description creates in your mind a nominal mental image or a sound generality. So technically, sound generality is like an exact translation of the Tibetan da-chi. Da means sound, chi means generality. But if you ask what that means, nominal mental image may be a nice way of translating that rather than just literally sound generality. So sound doesn't necessarily mean that you have to hear it. Like you say, you can read it. So for instance, when we talk about the three kinds of wisdom arisen from hearing, wisdom arisen from contemplation, wisdom arisen from meditation. Have you heard that kind of division before? Wisdom arisen from hearing doesn't mean that you have to have heard it. You can have read it also. So, the reading and having explained in words to you have a similar kind of effect on the consciousness. When you have contemplated that and started to analyze it and eliminated misconceptions, honed in on the meaning, you have a deeper kind of wisdom called wisdom arisen from contemplation. Once you've come to a clear mental image of that, which is factually concordant, and you concentrate on that without analyzing it any longer, there's a deeper kind of wisdom that arises called the wisdom arisen from meditation. That's of a different category now. You could say that when you're meditating, you're contemplating, but if the meditation no longer is conceptualizing, analyzing, like Vipassana, but just holding that mental image, that conclusion that you've come to, that's a deeper kind of wisdom that's imbued in your consciousness, called a wisdom arisen from meditation. So when we talk about hearing, it doesn't mean only hearing sounds. It can include reading. Okay. Before I go back to Stephen, was there someone else who had raised their hand? Nadine, had you raised? No. Stephen, yeah, you had another follow-up question.
Yeah, thank you. So a meaning generality, it's mistaken according to its appearing object, but it could also be erroneous, like the horns of a rabbit.
A mental image.
Yes, a mental image.
Right.
Does a sound generality, does it kind of follow the same behavior as a meaning generality or a mental image? It can be, well, I guess it's always mistaken according to the appearing object. It can be wrong according to the engaged object as well. When I think, I don't know, I think this is a pot.
Right. Which
Is
was
that
not
right?
a pot, in case you didn't look at what he was holding up, something which was not a pot. Okay.
So
So you can have, yeah, you can have a nominal a nominal mental image or a sound generality, which is not factually concordant. Factually concordant means that which is, in accordance with reality, right? You can have a wrong description of something.
if it is concordant though, does it become pramana like we described, one of the three types, the pramana or valid cognizer of speech? Is it that when it is concordant, or is it like the inferential cognizer by renown? Like,
Yeah. So yeah, something to think about. Once we know more and more of these kinds of details, we start to see either connections or discordancies with other things that we've heard. And this is one of the great values of learning like this, because you can understand other things in more detail that you would not have seen in the past. I don't want to comment on that exact question right now. Let's go on a little more general vision of this. First of all, did someone else have another question? So let's go a little bit further. So here, instead of just defining conception as a determinative knower that apprehends a sound generality and a meaning generality as suitable to be mixed, it just came out of left field. It says the definition of free from conceptuality is free from being a determinative knower. So it's free from being a conception that apprehends a what's the other term here? Nominal image and a experiential image as suitable to be mixed. Okay, so just so you know where we are. So we skip down now. That's all it says here in this section about non-conceptual. Maybe it will come up again in conceptual consciousness later. So now, I just want to go a little bit further. Non-valid consciousness on page 31. So previously we talked about valid cognition or pramana. Now with respect to non-valid consciousnesses, there are two parts. definitions and divisions. So in our own system, this is on page 32, right? Our Rangluk, our own tradition, our own system. The definition of a non-valid cognizer is a knower that is not newly incontrovertible, right? Pretty simple, right? Remember, the definition of a valid cognizer is that which is new and incontrovertible. So now it's just the opposite. Which is not newly incontrovertible is a non-valid cognizer. So why is this important? Because the text that we're studying, called Lo Rig, generally is talking about awareness and knowing. But as I mentioned to you, there's another way that Lo Rig is written, where Rik doesn't mean knowing, but means types. So like, for instance, this book called A Compendium of the Ways of Knowing, or the Types of Knowing. There, the author took Rik in Lo Rik to mean types. And it's a general subject that was mentioned by the great logicians, that there are 7 ways of knowing. So, or 7 types of knowing. So you could start with wrong consciousness. You know, you have a wrong idea about something. Oh, the self definitely exists. Or there is no reincarnation. There's no karma. From a Buddhist perspective, that would be a wrong consciousness, right? Once something has been explained to you, you can start to develop, say, from your wrong consciousness that the self really exists. Once it's been explained to you that the self doesn't inherently exist, you could start to develop a doubt about what you previously believed. You held very firmly that there was a self of persons. Now you begin to think, maybe there's not a self of persons. Maybe there is, I don't know. There are different kinds of doubting consciousness. Wrong consciousness is definitely non-valid, right? Wrong consciousness. Would you say it's could it be a valid consciousness? Wrong consciousness? No. Doubting consciousness, could that be valid? You might say, well, it's a valid doubt. Is that a valid consciousness? Doubting consciousness, as we'll see as we give the definition of it more, is two-pointed. It hasn't come to a conclusion. You can have doubt leading in the wrong direction, leaning in the wrong direction. Maybe the self exists, maybe it doesn't, but it probably exists. Do you see what I mean by leaning in the wrong direction? Sort of tending to that, you know, maybe this, maybe that, but probably that. You can have equal doubt. Maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. This is the universal, you know, I don't know. You can have doubt leaning in the right direction. Maybe the self exists, maybe it doesn't, probably doesn't exist, you know, for various reasons. You haven't realized it. It's not a valid cognition, but it's leaning in the right direction. From there, another non-valid cognition would be correct belief or presumption or correct presumption, however you'd like to translate it. What that means is what we probably have in our consciousness now about most Buddhist subjects. Oh yeah, reincarnation exists. Do you believe reincarnation exists, Yarbo?
Yes.
Rowena? Have you would you say you're certain of that?
Pretty much so, yes. Very, very close to certain. Once in a while, one thinks something, but basically most evidence that I have experienced says yes.
Okay, so you may not have gone down to correct belief yet. You still have a little bit of doubt.
It's very little because it's almost an
Okay,
automatic belief.
okay, little, but some.
But once in a while,
Doubt is a mind
somebody.
which is two-pointed, that hasn't reached absolute certainty about something. Correct belief, correct belief or presumption is sort of reached a conclusion. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, reincarnation exists.
Yeah.
Past lives exist. Karma exists. So forth. The self is empty of true existence. Is reached a belief in that, but has not eliminated all of the not just doubt. Let's say it's no longer doubting, but it hasn't realized its object. That's called the correct belief. From there, you could develop an inferential cognizer, fourth way of knowing. Inferential cognizer now realizes that the self is empty of inherent existence, realizes that past lives exist through inference. There are actual logical proofs to prove the existence of past and future lives. Did you know that? Actual logical reasonings. Inferential cognizer now is the first valid cognizer of these. Wrong consciousness, doubt, and presumption or correct belief, successively getting closer to the object, but not yet realized it. Inferential cognizer would be the first of these subtle phenomena, like emptiness and selflessness and impermanence and past and future lives and so forth, would be the first actual valid cognition. You can have valid cognitions before with your eye consciousness. You can see trees and so forth. You don't have to infer the existence of trees. You can see them directly from the beginning. We're talking about subtle phenomena that you might have mistakes about. Wrong consciousness, doubt, correct belief, inferential cognizer. And then as a result of inferential cognizer, you can have over time, as you meditate on that longer and longer, the mental image, let's say of emptiness, can become more and more subtle, and you can eventually have a direct perception of emptiness, right? A yogic direct perception of emptiness. Both the inferential cognizer, the fourth, and direct perception, let's say, of emptiness, both of them are realizing consciousnesses. The first instance of both of them are valid cognizers, according to Sautrantika. The second and third and fourth moments of them are still realizing consciousnesses. They realize their object, but they're no longer fresh. So those are called subsequent cognitions, sixth way of knowing. And then we can throw in the seventh way of knowing is inattentive perception. So that can go in various places here. So those are called the 7 ways of knowing. So now although we've talked about prime cognizers, we've talked about direct perceivers, we talked generally about conceptual minds. Now we're talking about these other ones, starting with wrong consciousness, doubt, correct belief. We're going to be talking about those in a little more detail. So in our own system, the definition of a non-valid consciousness. So what would be, how many non-valid consciousnesses are there? Of these 7, how many are non-valid? 3. How many is, Doris is just saying she's got a question, or are there 5? So someone says 3. Christine says 4, or no, 5. Even 5. Okay, so what are the non-valid? I think there's only 7 altogether, right? Non-valid are Wrong consciousness. What else?
Doubting.
Doubt. Correct belief is not valid. And also an object, a consciousness to which an object appears and is not apprehended or inattentive perception, that's also invalid. So there are four invalid, only three, and among those, subsequent cognizers are not valid. So there are only two valid, according to Sautrantika, there are only two valid ways of knowing. So there are five invalid ways of knowing, right? When non-valid or invalid consciousnesses are divided, there are five. Subsequent cognizers, they're not valid because they're not fresh. Correctly assuming consciousness or presumption is not valid because it hasn't eliminated all superimpositions. It's just assuming or believing something, but it hasn't realized it with inference, with logic. Awareness to which an object appears but is not ascertained, or in other words, inattentive perception, that's not valid. Doubting consciousness is obviously not valid. Even the doubt that thinks probably there are future lives, probably, it's still a doubt in one mind, that's not valid. And wrong consciousnesses are obviously not valid, right? Capito? Capito? First, subsequent cognizers. Actually getting near the end of the class here. Subsequent cognizers. With respect to the first, the definition of a subsequent cognizer is a knower that realizes that which has already been realized. So if you talk about realizing consciousnesses, subsequent cognizers realize their objects, but they don't have the factor of being fresh. So according to Sautrantika, there would not be called a prime or valid cognizer. But I'll just say first, Yarpo, before, you may recall that for Prasangika, for a consciousness to be valid, it doesn't have to be new. It doesn't have to be fresh. It just has to realize its object. So for Prasangika, subsequent cognizers are also valid cognizers, also prime cognizers. Yarpo, did you have another point?
No.
Oh, I thought you raised it. So subsequent cognizer, a knower that realizes that which has already been realized. So again, for Prasangika, even a remembering consciousness can be a subsequent cognizer. It can realize its object that has already been realized. Okay. So Sautrantika wouldn't accept that as being a realizing consciousness. When subsequent cognizers are divided, there are three. Subsequent direct perceivers, subsequent conceptual cognizers, that means, and subsequent cognizers that are neither of the two. Directly perceiving subsequent cognizers, sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, self-knowing direct perceivers, yogic direct perceivers, and directly perceiving subsequent cognizers that are none of the four. So what is this category when it says neither of the two, none of the four? What does that mean? That sometimes throws people. Say, for instance, when we say subsequent cognizers are divided, there are three. So subsequent direct perceivers, what does that mean? You have a direct perceiver, sees the trees. The first instant is valid. The second instant, third, fourth, and subsequent ones in that train of perception are subsequent direct perceivers, right? Conceptual subsequent cognizers. What does that mean? That means that the conceptual consciousness has realized something, is a valid, let's say the first instant of that would have been valid. So that must be a terminology is going out of my head. That must have been a what was it? You must have realized it through a logical reasoning. It must be you must have had a, what's the word I'm trying to say? My earlier I said Alzheimer's is coming.
Inferential.
Inferential. Must have been an inferential cognizer. The subsequent moment to that is no longer called an inferential cognizer. It's just called a subsequent cognizer. It's the second moment, the moment after you've realized something through inference, the inferential cognizer, the second moment is not called a subsequent inferential cognizer. It's no longer an inferential cognizer because it's not realizing the object by the force of the logical reasoning. It's just sort of being carried along by that. So that's called a conceptual subsequent cognizer. How about subsequent cognizers that are neither of the two? Oh, I think everyone's getting a little bit sleepy here. Karen, can you think of something which is neither of the two? Doris, Raina, Amanda?
Subsequent cognizer to something that's not a direct or conceptual subsequent cognizer. So like a subsequent cognizer to a wrong consciousness?
No, subsequent cognizer has to realize something which is previously realized.
Bad example.
So that wouldn't work. Oh, it's a good try, good try. Here, it's a little bit tricky. I mean, it's sort of a terminology. What if I just say subsequent cognizer?
I got it.
Subsequent cognizer is a subsequent cognizer, but it's not
general.
Necessarily a direct perceiving subsequent cognizer, nor a conceptual subsequent cognizer. It just says subsequent cognizer. Christine, you kind of look disappointed.
So it's just the general term there for the none of, and would that work?
That would also work for none of the four, okay?
Gotcha. All right, thank you.
Okay, so I've run out of time. I've gone to the full limit of the 2 hours, which Shankar had asked at the beginning, could we do an hour and a half? But I wanted to get into these so that we could possibly finish next week. Maybe we need another week after that. So let's do a short dedication. We created some virtuous karma today by our motivation at the beginning. And when we make dedication of merit, we don't have to dedicate only the merit that we've created today. We can dedicate the merit that we've created in the past, even if it's been dedicated in the past. The merits that we've created this year, this lifetime, even the merits that we will create in the future. Think that due to these virtuous actions that I've created, may they ripen in such a way that they enhance my spiritual development day by day, year by year, life by life, so that I can quickly realize the three fundamentals of the path, three principles of the path: renunciation, bodhicitta, the right view of emptiness, that they may ripen in such a way that if I'm fortunate that I can meet the tantric path in this and future lifetimes, to quickly achieve enlightenment so that I can be a means to alleviate the suffering of all sentient beings perfectly, unerroneously, spontaneously, bringing them out of suffering into the blissful state of enlightenment. Due to these merits, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha in order to lead each and every sentient being into that very same state. And seal the dedication in an apprehension of the emptiness of the three spheres. The merits I'm dedicating don't inherently exist. They're just nominally imputed. The goals dedicated to the gradual development of realization of the principles of the path, the bodhisattva practices, meeting the tantric path, achieving enlightenment, all of them do not inherently exist, but they do exist conventionally as nominal imputations. And the act of dedication, joining the merits with those goals, is just a process. It can't be found anywhere. It's just conventionally existent, but not inherently existent. Thank you very much. So hopefully see you next week. Maybe Bob and Shankar will be back with us. Have a good week. Stay safe and be happy. Take care.
Thank